The man who got my truck running that night never asked for money, never gave me his name, and barely spoke. At the time, I was too relieved to question it. It wasn't until I reached the next truck stop that I realized there was no good explanation for how he had found me. My name is Darren Holt, and this happened in October of 2019 on eastbound I-80. A few miles outside Princeton, Illinois. I had been driving commercially for almost 14 years, so breakdowns, bad weather, and long nights alone were nothing new. I was deadheading toward Joliet after dropping a load in Des Moines. My trailer was empty, but the wind kept shoving it toward the shoulder. The storm had followed me across Iowa, and by the time I entered Illinois, the rain was coming down so hard that my wipers couldn't keep up. It was close to 2 in the morning. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing. The few trucks that passed threw walls of spray across my windshield. My rig was a 2007 Peterbilt 379 with more than 1 million miles on it. I knew every vibration that truck made. About 20 miles west of Princeton, I felt a faint tremor through the steering column. Then the cab lights flickered. The voltage needle dipped and bounced back. I remember saying, "Come on, girl, don't do this tonight." A minute later, the radio cut out. Then the entire dash went black. The engine died so suddenly that the cab lurched. I lost power steering, hit my hazards, and fought the wheel while the trailer drifted onto the rumble strip. I managed to coast onto a narrow shoulder beside a muddy drainage ditch. When I stopped, I tried the key. Nothing. No starter click. No dash lights. No interior power. I called dispatch, but my signal kept dropping. My dispatcher said roadside service was at least 90 minutes away because of the storm. I set out my reflective triangles, pulled on a rain jacket, and opened the hood. Water ran down my sleeves while I checked the battery connections and main cables with a flashlight. A total electrical loss usually means a battery, ground, or master power issue, but everything looked secure. After a few minutes, I climbed back into the cab and locked both doors. I tried calling my wife, but the call went to voicemail. I told her I was safe and would be home late. That was when 2 headlights appeared in my mirror. The vehicle slowed behind my trailer and pulled onto the shoulder. It wasn't a tow truck or service van. It was an old dark pickup, maybe a late 70s Ford, with one headlight dimmer than the other. The driver's door opened. A thin, slightly hunched man stepped out wearing a dark mechanic's coverall. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He had no raincoat or hat. An oval patch was sewn over his chest, but its lettering was too faded to read. I lowered my window. "You need help?" I called. He didn't answer. He walked past my cab toward the open hood. I should have stayed inside. But I was stranded in a dead truck during a violent storm, and he looked like he knew what he was doing. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. "Electrical problem," I said. "Lost everything at once. Road service is coming." He didn't acknowledge me. He leaned into the engine bay and began feeling along the cables. His movements weren't slow. They were deliberate, like he had made the same repair hundreds of times and knew exactly where every part would be without looking. I aimed the flashlight where he was working. He reached behind the battery box, twisted something with both hands, then moved toward the firewall. "You carry tools?" I asked. No response. He pulled a short, blackened wrench from his pocket, used it once, and put it away. I tried to see his face, but whenever I shifted the light toward him, he turned just enough to keep it in shadow. All I could make out was a pale cheek and a strip of gray hair. The rain soaked through my jacket and filled my boots. But the man's coveralls never darkened. Water struck his shoulders, yet the fabric looked completely dry. I told myself the fabric must be waterproof. After 7 or 8 minutes, he straightened and slammed the hood shut. He started walking back to his pickup. "Hold on," I said. "Let me try it first." He stopped without turning around. I climbed into the cab and turned the key. Every dash light came on. The starter cranked once and the engine fired. It idled smoother than it had all week. I leaned out the window. "What do I owe you?" The man stood beside his open door and turned his head slightly toward me. "Don't shut it off again," he said. His voice was low and rough, almost buried under the rain. Then he climbed into the pickup and pulled onto the interstate. I watched its taillights in my mirror. The road behind me was straight for at least half a mile, but after only a few seconds, both lights disappeared at the same time. I told myself the storm had swallowed them. Road service called 10 minutes later. I canceled the request and told the dispatcher a local mechanic had stopped. He went quiet, then said, "At 2 in the morning, in this weather?" I laughed it off, but I did not shut the engine down. About 45 minutes later, I pulled into a crowded truck stop near Morris. I parked under the brightest lights and went inside for coffee. My hands were still shaking. When I returned, I noticed mud all over my boots and the driver's side floor mat. The shoulder where I had broken down had been soft enough that I sank into it. The other man had walked around my truck several times, yet there had been no muddy prints except mine. The next morning, our regular mechanic inspected the Peterbilt. He found that the main ground connection had nearly separated from its mounting point. Someone had tightened it and braced it with a narrow strip of braided copper. He held it up and asked, "Who fixed this?" I described the man and his old pickup. The mechanic stared at the copper strip and said it was the kind of grounding braid shops used decades ago, not something most modern roadside technicians carried. I asked if someone could have made that repair in the dark, in heavy rain, with one wrench and no work light. He said, maybe, if he already knew exactly where to reach. A few weeks later, I drove that stretch again in daylight. Near where I believed I had broken down, I noticed an abandoned service station beyond the frontage road. The building was boarded up, and most of its rusted sign was missing. The only shape still visible was the faded outline of an oval. I never found out who helped me. I have driven through worse storms since then, but I no longer push through that section of I-80 after midnight. And anytime the voltage needle moves, even slightly, I hear that man's voice again. Don't shut it off again. My name is Melissa Carter, and this happened in the fall of 2021 on northbound I-75, about 15 miles south of Lexington, Kentucky. I had been driving professionally for 6 years. That night, I was hauling a sealed, refrigerated load of medical supplies from Knoxville to Columbus, and I was cutting it close on my hours. The storm had followed me across the state line. By midnight, the rain was coming down so hard that every passing truck threw a wall of water across my windshield. I kept both hands locked on the wheel and dropped my speed below 50. About a mile before the next exit, I heard a sharp bang from the passenger side, followed by a violent slapping beneath the cab. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. One of my drive tires had blown, and pieces of rubber had torn into an airline. The pressure gauge started falling almost immediately. I switched on my hazards and eased onto the shoulder before the brakes locked. By the time I stopped, the warning buzzer was screaming and the air pressure was nearly gone. I called dispatch and then the roadside number they gave me. The woman on the phone said the nearest service truck was at least 90 minutes away because several wrecks had tied up the interstate. She told me to stay inside with the doors locked. That was fine with me. The shoulder was narrow, and the ditch beside me was filling with muddy water. The trailer shook every time a vehicle passed. I sent my location to dispatch and tried calling my 12-year-old son, who was staying with my mother. He didn't answer. I was actually relieved. I didn't want him hearing the stress in my voice. About 20 minutes later, a white utility pickup pulled in behind my trailer. At first, I thought help had arrived. The truck had an amber light bar on its roof, and two men in reflective rain jackets stepped out. One approached my driver's door, while the other disappeared along the passenger side of the trailer. The man at my window was broad-shouldered, maybe 40, with a dark beard and a baseball cap pulled low. He tapped twice on the glass. "Road service," he shouted. "Step out and show us the damage." I cracked the window less than an inch. "That was fast," I said. "What company are you with?" He glanced back at the pickup. "County contract. Come on out so we can get you rolling." There was no company name on the truck, no unit number, no phone number. I asked for the work order number. His expression changed. Not much, but enough. He leaned closer and said, "Ma'am, you want help or not?" I told him to wait while I confirmed with dispatch. As soon as I raised the window, he slapped the door hard enough to make me jump. Then he smiled. I called roadside assistance again. The same woman answered. When I told her a service truck had arrived, she went silent. Then she said, "Melissa, we have not dispatched anyone. Lock the doors and do not get out." My stomach dropped. I looked in the passenger mirror, but I couldn't see the second man. The rain swallowed everything beyond the trailer. The bearded man knocked again. "We found a fuel leak," he said. "You need to get out right now." I knew the smell of diesel. There was no smell, no smoke, and no fuel warning before the tire blew. I told him the police were on the way. He stared at me through the glass and tried the door handle. Not a casual pull. He yanked it twice. The second man appeared in my passenger mirror. He was crouched near the back of the cab, moving toward the passenger side steps. I grabbed the CB microphone and switched to channel 19. "Any northbound driver near mile marker 92, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the blue Kenworth on the shoulder. Two men are trying to get into my truck." For several seconds, all I heard was static. Then a man answered. "Blue Kenworth, this is a gravel hauler 2 miles back. Keep your doors locked. I'm coming to you." The bearded man must have heard the CB through the door. He stepped back and looked toward the interstate. The second man climbed onto my passenger side step and pulled on the handle. I hit the air horn. Both men flinched, but they didn't leave. The man on the passenger side raised a short pry bar. I moved into the sleeper and grabbed the wooden tire thumper I kept beside the bunk. It wasn't much of a weapon, but holding it made me feel less helpless. The bearded man returned to my window. "Last chance," he shouted. "Get out before this thing catches fire." Then, he struck the glass with the metal end of his flashlight. The window didn't break, but a white crack appeared near the bottom corner. He raised his arm again. A deep air horn erupted behind them. A red tri-axle dump truck came onto the shoulder, its headlights and roof lights cutting through the rain. It stopped at an angle behind the pickup, partially blocking it in. The driver shouted over his external speaker, "State police are coming. Get away from that truck." Both men ran for the pickup. The dump truck driver edged forward, forcing them to reverse through the mud before they could reach the interstate. Their tires spun, caught, and the pickup shot away with its lights off. The gravel hauler parked behind me and stayed there until a Kentucky State Police cruiser arrived. The trooper checked my truck and searched the shoulder. Near the passenger side, he found a bundle of heavy-duty zip ties in the grass. He couldn't prove they belonged to the men, but he photographed them and added them to the report. The dump truck driver's name was Ray Foster. He was in his late 50s and had been hauling gravel overnight for a road project near Richmond. Ray told me he had almost taken the previous exit for coffee, but he heard my voice on the CB and stayed on the interstate. He waited until the real service truck arrived. The mechanic confirmed that the blown tire had damaged an airline. He repaired it and replaced the tire while the trooper took my statement. They never found the white pickup. Its rear plate had been covered with mud, and its description matched utility trucks reported stolen in nearby counties. The trooper also said there had been complaints about men impersonating roadside workers. I saw Ray once more about 3 months later at a truck stop near Berea. I bought him breakfast, and he brushed off what he had done. He said anybody on the road would have stopped, but dozens of vehicles had passed me before he arrived. Ray was the only one who heard the fear in my voice and decided it was his problem too. I still drive I-75, and I still keep that old CB installed, even though most drivers rely on phones now. Whenever someone claims they were sent to help me, I stay behind the locked door until they give me my name, my company, and the correct work order number. Because those two men didn't find me by accident. They saw a woman alone, a disabled truck, and a storm loud enough to hide whatever they planned to do. The truck I followed through an Arizona monsoon belonged to a driver who was already more than 70 miles ahead of me. My name is Eric Lawson, and this happened in July of 2022 on westbound I-40. Between Flagstaff and Seligman, Arizona, I was deadheading an empty dry van from Albuquerque to Barstow. Empty trailers can be worse than loaded ones in bad weather, because every gust pushes the box around. That night, the wind kept nudging my trailer toward the shoulder, and the rain was coming down hard enough to erase the lane markers. My friend David Mercer was running the same route in another company truck. We had stopped for coffee in Winslow, but he pulled out about 40 minutes before I did. We planned to meet at a truck stop in Kingman and shut down there. David drove a silver Freightliner with a blue stripe along the sleeper. One of the red marker lights on the upper left corner of his trailer had burned out that afternoon. From a distance, the uneven row made his trailer easy to recognize. I had a little over 2 hours left on my clock when I entered the worst part of the storm. Traffic thinned west of Flagstaff. I could hear drivers warning each other about standing water on Channel 19, but their voices faded as the weather got worse. Then I saw a silver tractor pulling a white trailer ahead of me. Its upper left marker light was dark. I picked up the CB. "David, that you up ahead?" Static hissed for a few seconds. Then his voice came through. "Yeah, back it down, Eric. Right lane's holding water." It sounded exactly like him. Same rough voice. Same habit of saying my name at the end of a sentence. I slowed down and followed his taillights. David called out flooded spots and debris, and I warned him whenever the wind shoved my trailer around. At one point, he laughed and said, "Quit riding my mud flaps." That was an old joke between us. He always said it when I followed closer than he liked. For the next 30 minutes, I stayed several truck lengths behind him. No other westbound vehicle passed between us, and we never caught anyone else. It felt like the interstate belonged to the two of us. A green exit sign appeared through the rain. Old Route 66 next right. My GPS showed no planned exit. David's turn signal came on. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Wreck up ahead," he answered. "Road's blocked." "Follow me." I had not heard anything about a wreck, but the storm was killing reception. David took the ramp, and I followed. The pavement narrowed into an old 2-lane frontage road with cracked asphalt and weeds growing through the shoulders. My GPS displayed recalculating, then froze. The clock in the corner read 2:43 a.m. "David, you sure about this road?" No answer. His rig remained a few hundred feet ahead. I could see the uneven row of marker lights whenever lightning lit the road. A few miles later, he turned into an abandoned fuel stop. The sign had lost most of its lettering. The pump canopy leaned to one side, and plywood covered the diner windows. David stopped beside the old diesel island. I parked behind him and set my brakes. "David, what the hell are we doing here?" No response. I tried his phone, but the call failed. I should have stayed inside, but I thought something was wrong with him. David had once pulled me out of my truck after I nearly passed out from heat exhaustion in New Mexico. I wasn't going to leave him unchecked. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down. As I approached the tractor, I realized it was not David's Freightliner. It was an old cabover, the square front kind that had almost disappeared from American highways. Its paint was faded gray, with a narrow blue stripe beneath the windows. The trailer behind it had the same uneven row of red marker lights. The engine was idling, but I could not see anyone inside. I climbed onto the driver's side step and aimed my flashlight through the glass. The seat was empty. An old paper logbook lay open across the steering wheel. The pages were yellow and curled. I could not read the writing, but the date at the top was clear. July 28th, 1987. Then my CB crackled inside my own truck. "Eric, come back." It was David's voice. I ran across the lot and grabbed the microphone. "David, where the hell are you?" he asked. "I'm coming up on Kingman. I haven't heard from you since west of Flagstaff." I stared through the windshield at the old cabover. Its headlights went out. The engine stopped. Lightning flashed, and the diesel island was empty. The truck and trailer were gone. I released my brakes and drove out of the lot. The frontage road curved beneath the interstate and put me back on westbound I-40. As soon as I merged, my GPS came back to life. The clock read 3:31 a.m. 48 minutes had passed since the screen froze. I had been off the highway for what felt like 10 or 15 minutes. My electronic log recorded me leaving I-40 at 2:44. Its next location point placed me almost 50 miles farther west at 3:32. There was nothing recorded between those 2 points. I reached Kingman with only a few minutes left on my clock. David was already parked there. Inside the diner, he showed me his call history and ELD route. He had stayed on I-40 the entire time. He had been ahead of me since Winslow and was never close enough for me to see his taillights after Flagstaff. We pulled the memory card from my dash camera and watched the footage. For most of the recording, the road ahead looked empty, but whenever lightning flashed, 2 red taillights appeared in the rain. There was no visible tractor or trailer around them, just 2 lights keeping a steady distance ahead of me. The audio recorded both sides of the CB conversation. The other voice was faint and buried under static, but it sounded enough like David to make him uncomfortable. He listened to the final transmission 3 times. Roads blocked. Follow me. Then he said, "That sounds like me, but it isn't me." The next morning, an older driver told us the abandoned fuel stop had closed in the late 80s after a flash flood crossed the old highway. A deadheading truck had left the interstate during a storm and overturned near the entrance. Its driver died before anyone reached him. I asked what kind of tractor he had been driving. The old driver thought for a moment. "A cabover," he said. "Silver or gray. Blue stripe on the side." Our safety department blamed the gap in my electronic log on bad satellite reception. Maybe the rest was fatigue. Maybe the rain distorted another rig until it looked like David's. Those explanations work during daylight. They do not work when I remember the paper logbook open across an empty steering wheel. I still run I-40, but I no longer follow a familiar truck just because the taillights look right. I confirm the unit number first, and whenever someone on the CB tells me to leave the interstate during a storm, I stay on the highway until I hear a living person say my name. If these stories made you nervous about driving alone in the rain, leave a like, subscribe to Nightmare Reads, and join our growing community. Have a true frightening encounter of your own? Share it in the comments. Your story might be featured in a future video. Until next time, stay alert, lock your doors, and never follow unfamiliar lights into the darkness.